The sun blazed high above the rugged desert sky, spilling molten gold across the jagged ridges and dusty earth of the canyon where two Wild West cowboys, hardened by years of grit and trail dust, rode side by side on weary horses that had seen as many battles as their riders. And as the hooves struck the ground with a dull rhythm like an old war drum, the silence of the desert seemed endless, broken only by the whisper of wind scraping sand across stone. Yet beneath that silence there was a tension, a strange heaviness that neither man could quite name, though they both felt it in their bones like the way a storm brews on the horizon before thunder cracks. And as they pushed forward, sweat dripping under the brims of their wide hats, their eyes sharp beneath the shadows. The canyon narrowed into walls of towering rock that twisted like a serpent through the land, and it was there, in that narrow throat of the desert, that the earth itself trembled, at first so faintly that the men thought it was the echo of their horses' hooves, but then louder, deeper, until it sounded as though the very heartbeat of the world had awakened from slumber, and the cowboys reined their horses to a halt, their hands instinctively falling to the grips of their six-shooters. Because in the Wild West a man survived by trusting instinct before reason, and both men knew this was no ordinary tremor. And then, as dust cascaded from the cliffs and pebbles leapt like nervous creatures, a roar split the air, a sound so fierce, so ancient, so raw in its primal fury that it made the horses rear back and nearly unseat their riders. A sound that did not belong to coyotes or mountain lions, not to grizzlies or wolves, but to something larger, something older, something that by all rights should not exist in this time nor in this land. Yet there it was, echoing against stone until the canyon seemed alive with its fury. And when the dust settled, when the shaking stopped just enough for their eyes to steady, they saw it, towering at the far bend of the canyon, its hide glistening with scales that shimmered green and gold under the sun, its eyes burning like molten fire, its claws gouging into rock as easily as spurs into sand, stood a dinosaur, a massive beast that seemed ripped from the pages of a story told by madmen around whiskey tables, a creature that belonged to the dawn of the world. And yet, here it was, alive, real, and furious, blocking the only path through the canyon, and the cowboys exchanged a glance, one filled with disbelief, then grim resolve, because they were men of the frontier and knew that hesitation spelled death. And as the creature roared again, shaking the very sky, the first cowboy, a wiry man with a scar cutting down his cheek like a lightning bolt, drew his Colt and shouted to his partner, "We either die standing or ride through hell, but I ain't bowing to no beast, not today." And the second cowboy, broader in shoulder, his face worn like weathered leather, nodded sharply and spurred his horse forward just as the monster lunged, its jaws snapping shut with a crack that echoed like thunder, barely missing horse and rider. And the canyon exploded into chaos, dust swirling, rocks shattering as claws scraped against stone, and the men fired their pistols, the sharp cracks of gunfire like defiant shouts against the impossible, bullets tearing into scales that sparked and bled dark ichor. Yet the beast did not falter, did not slow. Instead, it charged with a fury that made the earth quake, and the cowboys, fearless or perhaps too stubborn to yield, split apart, riding hard to opposite sides of the canyon, guns blazing, the sound reverberating like war drums against the stone walls. And though fear clawed at their insides, adrenaline burned hotter. For they were men who had faced death before, in duels at dawn, in raids under starlight, in battles where only the quickest draw survived. And now, here in this cursed canyon, they faced death again, not in the form of man but of monster. And as the beast thrashed, its tail whipping with the force of a battering ram, smashing stone to rubble, one cowboy leaned low on his saddle, dodging death by mere inches, while the other aimed true and fired a shot straight into the creature's eye, a blast that made the monster stagger, back with a roar of pain so fierce it rattled the canyon floor. And for a moment, just a fleeting heartbeat, it seemed the men might have the upper hand. But the beast, wounded yet enraged, lowered its head and charged again, faster this time, more furious. And the Cowboys knew this was no fight of bullets alone, but of will, of grit, of refusing to die in the face of the impossible, and with every shot, every dodge, every defiant shout into the roar of the beast, they carved themselves into the legend of the canyon. Two men against a monster from the dawn of time, and as the dust rose higher, blotting out the sun in a haze of grit and fury, their battle became something more than survival. It became a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the Wild West, where men stood tall even when the world itself sought to crush them. And though the outcome of the fight still hung on the edge of a knife, one truth rang louder than the beast's roar, louder than the gunfire, louder than the pounding of hooves. Legends are not born in comfort. They are forged in fire, blood, and courage. And these two cowboys were about to carve their names into a legend so wild it would echo across time. And if you, dear listener, feel the fire of this tale and wish to ride with us further into the dust and danger of this untamed frontier, don't forget to subscribe, for this is only the beginning of the battle, and the sun has not yet set on the courage of men who dared to stand against monsters. The dust of the canyon had not yet settled, the echoes of gunfire still bouncing off the walls like restless spirits, and the monstrous dinosaur still writhed with rage, its wounded eye burning red with fury, its guttural roar splitting the desert silence into shards that pierced the very hearts of the cowboys. But those men were not the kind to back down, not the kind to yield, and as their horses panted hard, sides heaving, manes slick with sweat, the riders tightened their grips on the reins, the smell of gunpowder and iron thick in their nostrils. And in that instant, each man knew that this was more than a fight for life, it was a fight for legend, for the right to stand victorious where no man before had dared. And so with teeth gritted and hearts pounding like war drums, they pressed forward once more, firing round after round until the echoes rolled together like thunder chasing lightning, bullets striking scales that cracked and shattered, the creature howling, as dark blood dripped onto the sand in thick pools that steamed. Under the desert sun, yet still it fought, each lunge like a falling mountain, each swing of its tail a hurricane of force, smashing rock, splitting ground, sending shards flying like shrapnel from the earth itself. And one cowboy, the scar-faced rider with eyes like steel, leaned from his saddle and fired straight into the beast's gaping maw as it lunged for him, the shot bursting through flesh and bone, staggering it for but a moment, enough for his partner to wheel around and ride hard toward the beast's flank, firing point-blank into its hide until smoke and sparks wrapped the air in choking clouds, and the canyon became a furnace of fury, horse hooves pounding, guns cracking, roars shattering the sky, until suddenly the beast reeled back, its great body trembling, its wounded eye pouring blood, and with a furious bellow it snapped its jaws toward the broader cowboy's horse, teeth closing on air just inches from flesh. The force of it so strong the gust alone nearly knocked horse and rider off balance, and the cowboy pulled his reins hard, swerving, dust and rock spitting up under hooves as he barely escaped the crushing jaws. And in that chaos the scarred cowboy spotted their only chance, a ledge of jagged stone jutting above the beast, loose from the cliffside, heavy enough to crush even this ancient monster. And shouting above the roar of fury and fire, he called his brother-in-arms, "Drive it this way. Force it beneath the rocks." And though the words were nearly stolen by the chaos, the broader cowboy caught them, his eyes flaring with understanding. And he spurred his horse into a mad charge, firing wild, shouting, whistling, waving his hat, anything to draw the beast's rage upon himself. And the dinosaur, blinded by pain and driven by fury, followed, snapping its jaws, tail crashing, claws tearing earth as it barreled after him. And at the last second, the cowboy wheeled aside, galloping for dear life, while the beast charged headlong beneath the cliff. And that was when the scarred cowboy fired his final, desperate shot, aimed not at the beast but at the stone, the bullet striking, his eyes scanning the horizon where mesas rose like jagged teeth against the dying light. Because he too felt it, that strange pull, that unnatural current in the air that had birthed the dinosaur in their path, as though time itself had fractured in the desert, letting the ghosts of a prehistoric age bleed through. And sure enough, as night fell and stars flickered awake, the land revealed its secrets. For in the distance, fires burned where no campfires should have been. Great bonfires set high upon ridges, their smoke curling like black serpents into the night sky, and carried on the wind came a sound that chilled the marrow in their bones, a low, steady chant in some tongue neither man could place, older than the pueblos, older than the first settlers, older perhaps than the desert itself. And as they rode closer, drawn by the pull of mystery and the duty of survival, they came upon a sight that made even the scar-faced man's breath catch. An ancient gathering, a circle of hooded figures painted in ochre and ash, their bodies bent in ritual around a pit that glowed with molten fire, and above that pit hung bones, massive bones curved and sharpened, the remains of beasts that once ruled the earth. And the cowboys knew at once that the monster they had slain had not been chance, not fate, but summoned, called forth by this cult of forgotten blood, men who worshipped the ancient monsters as gods and sought to return them to the earth. And as the chanting rose and the fire cracked higher, the ground itself began to quake again, the bones in the pit rattling, glowing until they shook with life. And with a terrible cracking sound, another shape began to form. A skeleton knitting itself into flesh, scales sprouting from bone, muscle wrapping over sinew. Another beast being born from the fires of madness. And the broader cowboy drew his pistol with a curse, spitting into the dirt. One weren't enough, huh? Guess tonight we dance again. And the scarred man cocked back his hammer, his eyes cold as steel. Then let's give 'em a story that'll stop their chants forever. And with that they spurred their weary horses forward, two lone riders charging against the fire-lit circle of madness, pistols flashing under the stars, their courage carrying them once more into the jaws of the impossible. And though the night promised blood, chaos, and a battle fiercer than the canyon had ever seen, the cowboys knew one truth. They had not been born to die quiet in the dust, but to ride into legend again and again, until the world itself ran out of monsters. And if you, rider of stories, listener of legends, crave to know how men of the West faced not only dinosaurs, but the dark cults that summoned them, then stay with us, subscribe, and ride further into the fire, because the next chapter burns hotter than any yet told, the weak point in a shower of sparks. And with a groaning thunder the cliffside gave way, boulders crashing down in a storm of stone and dust, slamming onto the monster's back, cracking bones, crushing flesh, pinning it to the earth with a roar so fierce it seemed the sky itself might split, and the canyon shook as though the world had ended, then fell into silence, but for the dying groans of the creature, its massive body writhing once, twice before falling still, the ground trembling beneath its final breath. And the cowboys, their guns smoking, their horses trembling beneath them, sat for a moment in the thick silence of victory, staring at the impossible. Two men from the Wild West who had slain a beast older than time itself. And as the dust cleared, the sun blazed down once more, painting the canyon in gold and blood-red hues. And the men knew they had not only survived, but triumphed, writing their names into a legend that would outlive them, a tale told by campfires and whispered in saloons, of the day two cowboys faced a dinosaur in the desert and won. And though their bodies ached and their bullets were spent, they rode forward not broken but unbowed, not defeated but victorious, their shadows long under the blazing sun. And as they passed through the canyon's far mouth into the wide-open desert, the land seemed to bow to their courage, the sky wider, the air freer, as though the world itself acknowledged the grit of men who dared the impossible. And with the taste of dust and victory still on their tongues, they rode on toward whatever lay ahead. For such was the way of the West, no rest for the brave, no peace for the wanderer, only the endless horizon, the call of adventure, the test of courage. And so this chapter closes, not with the silence of death, but with the thunder of hooves, carrying legends forward. And if you, dear listener, felt the fire in this tale, If your heart raced at the clash of man and monster, if you wish to ride again with men who stand tall against the impossible, then I invite you, subscribe to this channel, join this journey, and together we will ride into the wildest stories ever told. For the West is not dead, its legends are alive, and the next ride is waiting just over the horizon. The sun had long begun its slow descent when the Cowboys rode clear of the canyon, the sky burning orange and crimson, as though the heavens themselves were painted in blood, and though they had triumphed against the monstrous beast that by all rights should never have existed in their world. Neither man felt the ease of victory for long, for the desert does not reward pride, it tests it, and as their horses carried them further into the wilderness, the silence grew heavy once more, broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the weary breaths of beasts and men, until at last the broader Cowboy spoke in a voice low and hoarse. "We ain't seen the last of this, not by a long shot," and his scar-faced partner gave only a grim nod.